of 2014. And on behalf of the Rutgers Alumni Association, I'm very excited to bring to you today the topic of the art of the cold introduction. So this is part of our 2024 LinkedIn event series, where we have a couple of topics that we bring to you throughout the year. Any questions or comments or feedback throughout, let us know, because I think we have the chat open, and we also have a section at the very end for a Q&A. And so this topic is pretty near and dear to my heart because, as I'm sure most of you are either at home in Jersey or on the East Coast, I am actually broadcasting from New Zealand. So I am an expat. I'm from Jersey, but I'm an expat, and I've been in New Zealand for a couple of years now. I work as a senior investment policies advisor for a New Zealand Crown entity. And what my day-to-day looks like is usually just helping plan for the country's investment in climate-friendly and climate-resilient public infrastructure, especially with a forecasted population boom in the next 10 to 20 years or so. So as you can imagine, when I moved to New Zealand, I kind of had to start over for a bit, because I did start my career in New York for a while, but coming to New Zealand was a completely different ballgame. And so the next couple of slides are just a reflection of what I wish I would have known when I first started networking, and what I wish I would have known when I found myself in rooms with people that I'd never met before. As I mentioned, this webinar is part of a series that we have. You can check out our YouTube, where we have a couple of the other sessions already recorded for posterity. This session is also being recorded too. So if you have to drop off at any point in time, feel free, because you'll be able to check it out later. These are some of the other sessions that we've had. It's not prerequisite viewing for today, but in terms of having a plethora of resources available to you, it is probably a good idea to check them out if you've got free time or additional questions that we can't get to today. You'll also see on your screen a QR code, and that just takes you to our link tree, because we have a bunch of other different resources that aren't related to career development from the Alumni Association. So we're also in charge of a couple of social events throughout the year, and we'd love to have you participate and join in on the fun. As a really quick refresher, here is a definition of networking. So I snipped this from Microsoft Copilot, the Microsoft version of ChatGPT, and it very helpfully sectioned out networking into professional and social networking. And as a quick refresher again, one of the best things to consider before starting networking, in order to give yourself a smoother experience, is to consider what your end goals are. Maybe you're exploring different career paths. Maybe you're looking for internship leads, because it is October, which is peak internship hiring and interviewing season. Maybe you just want to be better at making new friends, especially when meeting new people, which is always, a lifelong journey. Or you just want general career leads because you feel like you're being pulled into a whole bunch of different directions, and you just want a little bit more clarity. When it comes to contacts and networking as a whole, you can split it up into two separate categories. Most of the contacts that you'll have in your network are either going to be considered a cold contact or a warm contact. And it's pretty easy to figure out who's a warm versus a cold contact, because a cold contact is usually somebody who is a stranger. You've never met them before, or you have a very tenuous connection to them, but they're not part of your day-to-day life. They're not part of, your usual social orbit. And so they're fundamentally strangers. Then you've got warm contacts who you have a pre-existing relationship with. They could be a friend of a friend. They could be, an extended family member. They could be a coworker. But this is somebody that you already kind of know and that you would feel comfortable with just reaching out to them directly, versus a cold contact where there is going to be that sense of trepidation before you interact with them. So for today, we are going to focus on cold contacts. As a really quick reminder, I know that networking as a phrase is kind of daunting because it's, at least for me, it's a topic that I was only really introduced to during college. All of a sudden, during college, I was expected to kind of figure out and know how to network for the next 30, 40, 50 years of my life. But you should remind yourself that you technically have already started networking, even in your personal life, because you have to think about it from a different point of view. Networking is really just another phrase or just another term for relationship management. You've probably been the new person in a group setting before in some way, shape, or form. Maybe you moved around a lot as a kid and you were the new person in class. And you had to figure out really quickly, who is going to be your friend. And so that's networking. When it comes to Rutgers too, maybe you're the only person from your high school who attended Rutgers, who is attending Rutgers, and you showed up to orientation by yourself. And again, you had to figure out very quickly, we're trying to meet as many people as possible to figure out who was going to be a friend, who was going to, really help you, and who was going to stay in your life, or your Rutgers life. And that's all networking. So if you ever feel daunted, or if you feel a sense of just unease about networking, or if it feels a little bit, or if it just doesn't come easily to you, you technically have already started networking, and hopefully the next couple of slides just add to your experience and helps ease your mind a little bit. So the next couple of slides will go into a couple of situations that you might find yourself in when you are networking. So you can consider networking with cold contacts and separate them out into two pretty distinct categories. You're networking virtually, and you're also probably networking in person too. And both of these types of situations require very different skill sets and probably different things for you to work on, depending on if you're more on the introverted or the extroverted side. But of course, the couple of pointers that I have prepared for us, they usually go both ways. And so when it comes to virtual networking, this looks like a cold email to somebody that you don't know. You found someone that you really want to talk to, and so you send them an email. Or you found someone on LinkedIn that you think has your dream career and you want to pick their brain for a little bit, and you send them a connection request or a LinkedIn InMail. And once that kind of gets off the ground, maybe they agree to a Zoom call with you. So that's all different types of virtual networking situations. You've also got different types of in-person networking situations where you might find yourself having to connect with somebody that you've never met before. So these look like mixers or speed networking events, which Rutgers is constantly hosting. These also look like, a random maybe event with a meal, maybe some sort of brunch or a lunch. Even you can think of either like a tailgate too, as an event with a meal. You're usually eating, right? And that's a type of in-person networking too, because odds are maybe you only know one person at the tailgate, and there are a couple of other different people that you might want to meet, or you're just meeting them for the first time. But, the complication there is that you've got a meal or you've got snacks on hand, and that requires a different way of operating. Maybe your virtual networking, your email or your LinkedIn connection request was accepted, and you're planning to ask somebody to go to coffee with you, spend some time with you through a coffee, or maybe they're carving some time out of their day by agreeing to have lunch with you. And it also, these sort of situations all require a different skill set as well as a different mindset in terms of your approach. Before I get into it, there are a couple of general introduction tips just to keep in mind so you have a smoother journey when it comes to networking with cold contacts. You have to really, really know yourself, and you have to know your audience too. So knowing yourself means having a better idea of what you want out of the interaction, even before the interaction takes place. So if you have a good idea of reaching out to people because you're majoring in something pretty esoteric and you're not sure how to make that into a career, knowing yourself and knowing that these are your intentions can help shape the agenda of what that conversation is going to look like. Knowing your audience means that you have a targeted approach, and because you've already done that soul searching in terms of what you want for yourself, you're able to figure out better, or you're able to figure out better who to approach instead of sending out emails willy-nilly. Social media is also a tool and a weapon, and it's a really good idea to consider what you have out there and what is Googleable about you before you start networking, because once someone has accepted your LinkedIn request, or they're reading your cold email that you've sent to them out of the blue because they've never met you, the first thing that most people are going to do is Google you. And it's the same thing vice versa too. Once you're on the other side of the table, if a student randomly emails you and asks for a coffee request, and has a coffee request because they'd really like to spend some time with you and just learn from your career, odds are you're going to Google them too. And based on what you see from social media, that can really color the conversation that you have with them. And so you can kind of get away with this a little bit more if you have a very common name, but it's still best not to take chances. And it's okay to, have a different identity on social media, but just be aware that it is going to influence the way people interact with you. We go into a little bit more detail about social media in one of our other webinars in terms of LinkedIn. So if you have any additional questions, it's a good idea to check that out. And at the end, honesty is the best policy. So if you know yourself and you know that maybe you don't have the best idea of what you want, you just want to meet as many people as possible, you just want to just get yourself out there and just, putting yourself into the right mindset of meeting people in general, that's okay too, as long as you're honest about your intentions in that initial contact or in that initial interaction that you have with somebody. If someone who's pretty senior to you is standing in front of you and asking you what your interests are or why exactly you approach them, it's okay to say that, you have no idea. It's okay to not know what you want to do after graduation. It's okay to not really know what you want your career path to look like, but it does help the person who's trying to help you have a better idea of how to shape that conversation later on. Because I know I've been in situations before where I've had students approach me and they've been very prepared with a bunch of questions, but I could tell that these questions were kind of really manufactured and not tailored to me. And I've had to stop a couple of these coffee interactions and just say, hey, listen, I feel like we're really not getting to the crux of what you're looking for. So, do you want to take a step back and just kind of recalibrate and really think about what you want from this coffee? And that's actually changed the entire direction of the conversation, because beforehand, I could tell that they weren't really getting what they wanted out of me, but afterwards, because I had to kind of prompt them for it, I think they took a lot more away from the coffee than they would have beforehand if they hadn't been honest. Because otherwise, it's just a waste of time for everybody. So cold introductions, virtual. This looks like email or LinkedIn InMail. Keep the messages pretty short and personalized. People are busy. They're not going to read 6 pages of your biography. It would be nice if they did, but I've been in these situations before where when I first started sending out a lot of cold emails to people who were in my career and I just want to learn from them, I made that mistake of just kind of going into too much detail about myself and forgetting that people are very busy and they just don't have time to read an email from somebody that they don't know, right? And it also takes a lot of mental willpower to continue reading through a really long email. So keep it short, keep it sweet, make sure you build in that authority in terms of who you are and what you want out of this interaction. And just be sure to validate yourself. If there's some sort of connection that you have with this person, it could be a mutual interest. It could be, maybe you were both in the same sorority way back when. Try to come out the gate with it as soon as possible to kind of build in that accountability and to make sure that that person is a little bit more incentivized to reply to you. I'll still meet with people who I've never met before who are looking for career advice. That's fine. But I will make more time for people who have a connection to me. Maybe they went to Rutgers, maybe you're from the same hometown, things like that. I'll just add in that extra effort and time for that person if they've told me straight up, exactly what our connection is. And it's okay if you don't have a connection to this person at all. But again, keep it honest, keep it short and sweet and personalized. And then also too, it's pretty important to show some respect too, because like I said before, you're asking for someone's time. Time is the most valuable resource that we all have. You're asking someone to carve time out of their day. Maybe you want to keep this interaction to just email, and that's fine too. But you asking for someone's time through email, it still requires someone to sit down and read through, your questions, consider who you are. Maybe you sent over your resume too, and they're also looking at your resume and thinking of the best ways to help you. So it's, it does pay it forward to show respect for this interaction. And it just kind of really sets the tone too, that, if someone respects your time, they're going to respect your time as well. Maybe your email went really well. You've kept it short, sweet, personalized. You've talked about whatever mutual connection or connect that you have in common. And you've asked them for a Zoom meeting, or they've offered to meet with you via Zoom. So timing is everything. This is something that I, encounter all the time because I'm in New Zealand. I've had to switch things around multiple times. If somebody keeps emailing appointments to me from Eastern Standard Time, and it's my 2 a.m. And it's fine, but it also shows me that they're not doing their research too, because I've told them that I'm in New Zealand. Hopefully they already know that I'm in New Zealand, that I'm abroad. And for them to not do that additional research just kind of reflects a little bit poorly on them. And I'm happy to do that research too. You've got time and date converters online, which are super helpful, obviously. But just make sure that when you're setting up something, especially like a virtual call, like a Zoom or like a Microsoft Teams meeting, make sure that you have their location, and that you're not sending an invitation for Portland, Maine instead of Portland, Oregon. We're 4 years into virtual working, so the standard video call rules still apply. Make sure that you're in a well-lit background, especially if someone's meeting you for the first time, they don't really want to talk to a black screen, or even worse, if you're kind of speaking from the shadows a little bit. It just doesn't really help, ease their mind that, number one, they're talking to someone new, right? It's someone who's asked them for their time. But number two, they can't see your face, so they don't really know who they're speaking to. So it just builds that level of confidence a little bit more if they can see your face. You don't have any connectivity issues. You're not being constantly disrupted by external distractions, things like that. It's also really important to consider that when you are meeting someone virtually, that you do lose a sense of energy there. I'm sure you've been in situations before where, maybe you were chatting to somebody online, and once you actually meet them, their vibe is just completely different from what you expected. And that goes the same for any sort of Zoom call. I've met people before virtually where I've been able to fortunately meet them afterwards in person. And it's just wild what a 180 their personality becomes. So just be cognizant of that. If you feel like you come off a little bit tepid in your virtual calls, it doesn't hurt to try to raise the mood a little bit. I know that sometimes, virtual calls are great, but I know sometimes I've had to make do with phone calls, and that just really kind of puts a damper on the interaction a little bit because you only have their voice to go off of. You don't know if you can't tell if someone's smiling at you. You can't tell, you can only tell if someone's smiling or like in a good mood through their voice, and that's not always, an accurate representation of how they're actually feeling. So maybe you're going to be introducing yourself in situations where you don't know anybody else. You're making a cold introduction and it's in person. So in this example, maybe you're going to some sort of Rutgers mixer or a speed networking event, through career services, things like that. It's okay. I mean, it's very normal to have jitters for these sort of events because is probably outside of your comfort zone. You know, even now, I know that before I show up to like big events, like, you know, some sort of conference or things like that, it's still a little bit nerve-wracking, especially if I know that I'm the only person who's going. And so what helps me is if I bring a friend, someone who's maybe interested or even isn't interested and just wants to spend time with me. It's always nice to know that you have a friend in the background, but a caveat of that is to make sure that you're not just always, you know, speaking to each other and just monopolizing each other's time, because hopefully you're there with an agenda. You're really nervous, maybe you should consider having pre and or post event plans. So what that looks like is maybe you have some sort of, you know, speed networking event. It might put you into a better mood if you hang out with a friend beforehand, maybe grab a coffee or grab lunch with somebody. And it just puts you into a better mindset because you already know that, you know, someone likes you, right? So you're not going to worry about showing up to a speed networking event and feeling that, you know, you're not going to connect with everybody there. If you have a post event or post event plans with a friend after some sort of, you know, social networking event, that could be cool too, because it gives you something to look forward to. And it kind of feels like if you're having a really bad time, which you probably aren't, if you're having a really bad time, it's that light at the end of the tunnel that you have to look forward to after you finish up your event. And at these sort of events, you know, it pays to kind of remember that most people are also pretty nervous. You know, it's outside of most people's comfort zone to drop a whole bunch of strangers into one room and just expect them to kind of like intermingle, if that makes sense. And so I found it personally really helpful to be that person who says hi first. You have to consider cultural implications here too, because what works in Jersey might not work in New York City, might not work in Connecticut versus Colorado or California, right? So if you're in a society where social circles tend to be closed, they might not take too kindly to people who say hi first, versus if you're like, you know, like if you're down south or even if you're in New York, right? If you stride up to somebody and just say hi and just introduce yourself, people will have a much more positive sort of reaction to you. Maybe you've been invited to an event with a meal. So again, in terms of social events, that could look like, you know, a tailgate, or like you've been invited to, you know, a corporate dinner, or it's some sort of networking lunch or brunch, things like that. It pays to not show up hungry. I've made this mistake before where I've been distracted by the free food, especially if it's like a buffet. And I just, you know, forgot the reason that I was there because I was so distracted by the food and just distracted by the fact that there was just really nice, accessible food just ready and waiting for me. And I completely forgot about my agenda for the day. You might want to consider finding a seat first, but staying flexible. So what I mean by that is that you want to free up your hands for networking, right? You want to shake hands, you want to maybe exchange phone numbers and things like that. And so if you've brought a bag with you or like materials with you, just put your stuff down first and find a seat. But once you start mingling and start, you know, meeting people, maybe you've met somebody who you would really like to get their additional insight on something, or maybe you've just met someone super interesting and you want to continue the conversation. That's your opportunity to move your stuff and make sure that you try to sit next to them, or even just tell them that you want to sit next to them, because that's really valuable one-on-one time that if you were beholden to where you were already sitting, you wouldn't really have that opportunity. And so maybe you're in a situation where you just have absolutely no idea what the evenings or what the event is going to look like. You don't know if it's going to be past appetizers or if it's like a sit-down event or if it's like very formal. So here you can just take your cue from others. And this goes doubly to my example of that networking event that I went to, the breakfast, because while I was busy stuffing my face, I saw someone that I knew. She came up to me and she had to kind of pull me aside and very gently tell me that, you know, at these sort of events, you tend to network and mingle first, and then there's an actual speaker, and once the speaker comes on, then you sit down and actually have the breakfast. And so If she hadn't really told me, I don't think I would have read between the lines because I was just so overwhelmed. It was one of the first events like that that I'd ever attended to. So maybe your email or your LinkedIn request has been very successful, and you've asked this person to coffee because you want additional time that your email just didn't have time for, or they've proposed to spend time with you through a coffee, or they are happy to have lunch with you, in the middle of their workday. You might find yourself in a situation, especially if it's like a Friday lunchtime, where they're drinking because it's Friday for them, happy hour is just a couple hours away, but they're just getting their weekend started. You should keep in mind what your comfort zone looks like when it comes to alcohol. Don't drink if you don't want to. No one's really going to hold it against you. And if the person that you're sitting across from is trying to hold it against you, it really says more about them than about you and your decision. I have been in a couple of situations before where alcohol has been involved because it was Friday, it was lunchtime, they were getting their weekend started. I think it was like a long holiday or something. And I felt that the conversation was going to really take a turn for the worse if I didn't at least match their drinking. And so I kind of skirted out of that situation and a couple of other ones too by ordering the same thing that they ordered, but maybe just having a couple of sips. But if you can hold your alcohol, fine. But really, it's probably a better idea to just abstain from drinking regardless, because you want to make sure that you're fresh and you're prepared and that you're ready to kind of take in everything that this person's kind of imparting onto you in terms of knowledge, right? And introducing alcohol to that just adds a different element to it, and you're probably not really going to be able to concentrate as much as you'd like to. So lunch, coffee, it's always smart to dress for the venue. If somebody says to you, if they email back to you and they say that, they're free for coffee, but they only have time on Saturday at 10 a.m., no one's expecting you to show up in a three-piece suit. If you want to show up in whatever you wear on Saturday mornings, maybe you just came from a workout class, things like that, that should be fine. They understand. The same goes for if they've invited you to lunch on a Tuesday, they're taking time out of their day. Maybe it's a good idea to not show up in sweats or, show up in a crop top. Again, you don't have to wear a three-piece suit, but just be mindful of where they're coming from and try to meet them halfway. Lastly, I think it's always a nice gesture to try to offer to pay. No one is expecting you to pay. No one will allow you to pay, especially if you're more junior to them. I will never allow a student to pay for coffee or for lunch, ever. But I am impressed if somebody at least tries to offer. Again, I never take them up on the offer. No one will ever take you up on the offer if you try to pay for coffee. But they do note, and I've had people remark that to me before too, they do note that you've tried, because it is emblematic of, so someone, I've had students try to pay for coffee before and I've rejected them, of course. But I do remember the fact that they have tried to pay because, like I said before, it is emblematic of them trying to return the favor in terms of my time that I've spent on them. Again, time is the most valuable resource that we have, and just offering that as a gesture, generally, it really goes a long way. So maybe you've internalized a couple of these pointers for your future networking. Maybe when you think back on it, you feel like you've done a couple of these pointers before, but it's not really working. Or maybe someone's giving you bad advice and you feel like it's just, networking is just not really working out for you because the contacts that you're connecting with just aren't people who can help you, or you feel like you're going nowhere. At the end of the day, it's about them, not you. I've gone on a couple of, or I've been part of a couple of networking situations before where I think I caught them on a bad day. I think I called them when they were in the middle of a snowstorm. They were taking care of their kids and just having a really bad day. And so that really colored the conversation that we had, because they were in a bad mood. They couldn't concentrate on me. And I just, unfortunately, was the only person who was around to kind of bear the brunt of their mood swings. And so it's them, not you. Everyone's fighting, a battle that you can't see. Maybe you're getting really bad advice. Maybe people are telling you things that have absolutely nothing to do with you. I've gotten my fair share of bad advice before, where people have told me some really wacky, out of the box stuff. And my advice is to take it at face value. I try to approach it in a more constructive manner where I hope that whoever does make time to give me advice, usually it's well-intentioned. Usually they're coming at this from they genuinely want to help, but maybe their advice is a little bit more outdated. Maybe they're not as empathetic as you would hope for them to be. Listening is a skill. Not everybody works on it. And so maybe you've been telling them, I want to do this, this, and this. What's the best route to do that? And they're just not really telling you anything at all, or they're just talking, right? But they're not actually helping. Try to, figure out what you can take away regardless. I have a couple of stories like that too, where it just feels like we're getting absolutely nowhere, in this conversation. But, is the advice that they gave me applicable? Somewhat. And if I keep that in mind, then it is a productive conversation. And so, again, networking is a really long journey. Networking is synonymous with relationship management. So with your friends or with your family, you can apply a lot of these pointers too. And again, maybe you get ghosted, right? You've met someone, you've gone to coffee with them, things seem really great, they've promised you the moon, and you just never hear from them again. Or, maybe you've met a couple of people, or you've put yourself into a couple of networking situations where it just feels like you go to mixers and you feel like no one's really connecting with you or resonating with you in the way that you thought you would. Practice makes perfect. It's probably them, not you. Everyone's coming at it with a different mood. And it's just, if someone ghosts you, feel free to follow up a couple times, depending on how genuine or how valuable you thought the initial interaction was. But, at the end of the day, you can just file it away as practice, and you can learn from that as a lesson and move on. And hopefully your next interaction or your next social connect, especially if it's a cold contact, will be a little bit more productive and satisfactory. So we're wrapping up now and going to the Q&A, but I encourage you to stay in touch. There's our YouTube on the screen in front of you for our previous webinars, especially the ones that I referenced at the very beginning of today. This session has been recorded and should be available in the next couple of days or so. Again, there's that QR code for staying in touch with us in terms of other social networks rather, a lot of other different social events too. And if you want to really test out what you've learned today, hopefully what you've learned today, there is an upcoming event later in November where I think it's a mixer, but that'll be a good opportunity for you to, at least if you've never been to like a speed networking or like a mixer event, especially when it comes to networking or for professional interests, it's always a good idea to go to at least one in your career at Rutgers or in your tenure at Rutgers, just to get yourself out of your comfort zone and just to test yourself to see what you need to work on for the future, because networking is going to be a lifelong thing. It's if you're lucky, you're going to have a very long and productive and fruitful career, but it's always better to learn as many valuable lessons as you can when you're younger versus later.